I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2025 promised a seismic shift in the federal government. A long-overdue reckoning for the bloated, inefficient, overreaching, and corrupt bureaucracy that has choked American liberty for decades. But his agenda, rooted in deregulation, fiscal restraint, and a reassertion of national sovereignty, although nothing short of revolutionary, is in trouble. To deliver on these promises and to capitalize on the mandate he received from the American people, Trump will need more than a slim Republican majority in the U.S. House and Senate. He needs a commanding, unassailable supermajority. Why? Because the twin forces of an activist judiciary and the relentlessly obstructive Democrat Party in Congress stand poised to derail every move he makes. These entrenched enemies of reform wield their power not to govern, but to obstruct, subvert, preserve, and expand a centralized governmental status quo, a deep state status quo, corrupt and entangled, that serves their unattainable ideological fantasies over the will of the American people. Trump's vision is clear. Slash the federal government's sprawling footprint, dismantle to an acceptable level the regulatory state that strangles businesses, and restore transparency and accountability to a system that has grown fat on taxpayer dollars while delivering little in return. He's promised to gut agencies like the Department of Education, which has achieved next to nothing throughout its existence but to facilitate power to the teachers' unions, rein in the Environmental Protection Agency's overreach, which is now recognized as a loyal arm of the transformative global elite, and impose fiscal discipline on a bought-and-paid-for Congress addicted to reckless spending. These aren't modest tweaks. They're radical reforms that strike at the heart of the progressive neo-Marxian Leviathan. But such an agenda requires legislative muscle. Bills must pass both chambers of Congress with enough votes to override inevitable Democrat filibusters in the Senate and survive the gauntlet of partisan gridlock in the House. Even then, the real battle begins when these reforms collide with the courts, where activist judges, cloaked in black robes, eagerly await to twist the Constitution into a weapon against Trump's reformative policies. Without a significant Republican majority, this vision lays squarely behind the eight ball. Let's start with the courts, the most insidious obstacle to Trump's reforms. The activist judiciary, stacked with liberal ideologues and spineless moderates, has spent decades unconstitutionally expanding its purview and usurping the role of elected lawmakers. These unelected, black-robed tyrants don't just interpret laws, they invent them, striking down duly enacted legislation with smug pronouncements that reek of elitism. Look no further than their track record during Trump's first term. The travel ban on people coming into our country from nations that routinely gather at weekly prayers to chant death to America? Gutted by judges who fancied themselves arbiters of morality. Tax reforms that boosted the economy and wealth for all demographics across the board? Endlessly litigated by partisan hacks. And regulatory rollbacks that allowed small businesses to thrive, stalled by injunctions from district courts in deep blue strongholds like California and New York. A perfect example comes in a ruling by U.S. District Court Judge William Alsup in San Francisco, a Clinton appointee, who recently ordered President Trump's OPM director to rehire probationary workers at 6 different agencies, including Defense, Agriculture, Energy, Interior, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs, executing the bidding of the government sector labor unions. How can a president reform and streamline a bloated bureaucracy when the judiciary consistently interferes with the culling of the payroll? Judges like Alsop aren't guardians of justice. They're saboteurs of democracy. They hide behind vague notions of equity, precedent, and standing to impose their progressive dogma, overriding the will of voters and their elected representatives. Trump's plan to streamline the federal government by abolishing redundant agencies, eliminating corruption, redundancy, and waste, and slashing funds for the special interest projects of the far left will face an avalanche of lawsuits from activist groups cheered on by these judicial autocrats. A slim Republican majority might pass a bill, but it takes only one rogue judge to issue a nationwide injunction halting progress indefinitely. A supermajority in Congress is Trump's only shield against this judicial overreach. With enough votes, Republicans can codify reformative legislation so airtight, crafted with explicit language and overwhelming legislative intent, that even the most brazen activist judge will hesitate to strike them down. Better yet, a dominant majority could expedite judicial appointments, flooding the courts with constitutionalists who respect the separation of powers, or impeach activist federal judges rather than treating the bench as a super legislature. Without this, Trump's reforms will drown in a sea of litigation, courtesy of a judiciary that answers to no one. And if the courts are the long-term threat, Democrats in Congress are the immediate poison. This is a party that thrives on gridlock, weaponizing every procedural trick to stall any attempt at a reformative agenda. From downsizing the government and eliminating waste, fraud, and corruption in the deep state bureaucracy, to deregulation, tax cuts, and strengthening our defenses, today's Democrats hate it all. They hate all of it. During his first term, Democrats turned the House into a circus of endless investigations. Think Russia hoaxes and impeachment charades, while refusing to cooperate on even the most common-sense reforms. Now, with Trump back in power, we're seeing the beginnings of the same playbook, amplified. Senate Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, are set to filibuster anything that smells of Trumpism, from tariffs to border security. In the House, Nancy Pelosi's gaggle of minion successors will rally their caucuses to vote in lockstep against any bill that threatens their sacred cows, entitlements, climate boondoggles, and the maintenance of the administrative state. The filibuster is their ace in the hole. With a 60-seat threshold in the Senate, Democrats can block legislation even if Republicans hold a narrow majority. Trump's most ambitious reforms, say a complete overhaul of federal spending or a transition away from the income tax, require not just passage, but passage with enough force to break through this wall of obstruction. A slim majority leaves Trump vulnerable to a handful of defectors or moderates buckling under pressure from the media and the neo-Jacobin left-wing activists. A supermajority, however, flips the script. 60-plus Republican senators could steamroll the filibuster, while a commanding House majority ensures bills reach Trump's desk without endless haggling. Democrats don't just obstruct for sport. They're ideologically wedded to the very system Trump aims to dismantle. They worship at the altar of big government, viewing every agency, every regulation, every dollar of pork as a sacrament. Streamlining the federal government threatens their power base, the unions, the bureaucrats, the special interests, and the financial regurgitative network of shadow NGOs that bankroll their campaigns. They'll fight tooth and nail to preserve this monstrosity, even if it means paralyzing Congress and leaving the American people to suffer under a broken system. Only a Republican supermajority can crush this resistance to deliver the reformative legislation mandated by the American voters in the 2024 general election. History proves this point. In Trump's first term, Republicans held the House and Senate from 2017 to 2019, but their majorities were razor thin. 52 to 48 in the Senate, 241 to 194 in the House. The result? Constant fighting, defections, and a legislative agenda that stalled despite unified control. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act squeaked through, but broader reforms like infrastructure and health care crumbled under the weight of internal dissent and Democrat stonewalling. Even with a Republican trifecta, the margins were too tight to overcome the combined forces of judicial activism and congressional obstruction. Fast forward to 2025. The stakes are higher, and the opposition is more consolidated. A narrow majority, 53 to 45 to 2 in the Senate, and a 3-seat 218 to 215 edge in the House invites the very same chaos. A single rhino, like Mitt Romney or Lisa Murkowski, can tank a bill in the Senate, while a few squishy House moderates can doom it in the lower chamber. Meanwhile, Democrats exploit every crack, rallying their base and their allies in the media to portray Trump as a dictator, while quietly suffocating his desperately needed reformative agenda in committee rooms and courtrooms. A supermajority changes that calculus. Imagine 60 or more Republican senators backed by a 50-seat cushion in the House. Suddenly, the filibuster becomes irrelevant. Defectors can be ignored, and legislation codifying Trump's reformative executive orders can move at warp speed. Trump could sign laws reforming government within months, restructuring entire agencies, slashing budgets, and rewriting the rules of the administrative state before the courts or Democrats have time to regroup. This isn't just about winning. It's about winning decisively to render the obstructionist opposition impotent. Trump's election in 2024 was a mandate from the voters, a roar from the American heartland against a government that's grown too big, too corrupt, too globalist, and too disconnected. But mandates mean nothing if they can't be enacted. The activist judiciary and obstructive Democrats don't care about the voters. They serve a higher calling, their own warped vision of an unachievable pseudo-utopia enforced through injunctions, filibusters, and the regulatory deep state. These elites sneer at the working-class Americans who put Trump in office, preferring to dictate policy from their ivory towers and marble chambers. A supermajority is the only way to translate Trump's mandate into action. It's the battering ram Trump needs to smash through the walls of resistance, delivering the reforms he promised and reforms the voters mandated. A leaner government, lower taxes, secure borders, and an end to the overreaching nanny state. Anything less, and the saboteurs win, leaving the American people with a hollow victory and a federal government that continues to suffocate them. Donald Trump's second term is a chance to remake America, but it's a chance that hinges on raw political power. Only a supermajority in the House and Senate can give Trump the tools to overcome the black-robed tyrants of the activist judiciary and the neo-Jacobins of the Democrat Party. The stakes are too high for half measures. America demands boldness, and that starts with giving Trump the numbers to win. That's why there is no rest, no time for celebration. We must keep the pressure on. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station, WGUL AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is a threat to the very foundations of our great nation and to the very principles of liberty and justice. The goal of wokeism is to divide us, pitting Americans against one another based on race, gender, and identity. This ideology undermines free speech and open dialogue, which are the bedrock of our republic. It promotes censorship and cancels anyone who dares to challenge its extreme agenda. We must stand against this cultural Marxism and protect our constitutional rights. Say no to wokeism.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
So much is happening. So much changes in a 24-hour period. Case in point, we have the premier from Ontario kind of start changing his tune on tariffs, coming down to the United States saying he had a great meeting after all the bluster and all that stuff. And then you got Chuck Schumer, again, part of a pattern here, it looks like, suddenly turning around after saying, nope, that's it. We're drawing the line right here. We're not voting for this thing. And suddenly they are. What do you think?
Oh, it's because they have to bluster for their base. That's what Democrats and liberals do. They bluster for the base, and then they look at political realities and realize that they have to do it a certain way. Otherwise, they threaten their own political longevity. Mm-hmm. So the Ontario Prime Minister shot his mouth off about volleys being launched back and forth, and realized that he doesn't have all the cannon shot that he needs, and decided to rephrase his what he could and couldn't do, understanding that the people will get over it in about a week, depending on what the news cycle is up there. Schumer's the same way. He needed to shoot his mouth off in the beginning. You don't have the votes. It's not going to pass. Nothing's going to happen. It would be a whirlwind, I guess. And he realized that, we're being hypocritical, because if we vote to shut the government down, how can we be upset if government employees are getting fired?
Right.
You know, so they don't think things through. And this is a perfect example of the liberal mindset. It's always knee-jerk. It's always emotional. They don't think things through. And once they are forced to think things through, they realize they can't be as extreme as they would like.
Well, sure. And one of the things Schumer was talking about, Frank, is he's trying to make everybody think, he's helping to protect everyone from Trump, because Trump would get so much more power in the government shutdown, and they just can't allow that. So they're once again, Frank, standing in the gap for us. Isn't that something?
Except for when you look at the polls after and again, I'm not a big fan of polls, but when they're so lopsided, you have to give them some credence. Look at the polls after the joint session of Congress speech. People approved of what Trump said and what he was going to do, self-proclaimed on the floor, almost by 80%. So, what is he protecting, the 20% from Trump? Is that what he's doing?
I guess so.
Not a winning hand.
No. And it's all about, like you said, they're blustering for their base, as you said. They, have this notion, I guess, that their strategy is somehow going to pay off. But Frank, by the time we get a few months down the line, especially if you get the big, beautiful bill done, the tax cuts and all that, it's just that they're going to be relegated to the ash heap of history. It seems like nobody's going to want to go back to the days of Biden and the Democrats.
Well, as we've talked about in the past, I'm no fan of big, beautiful bills. I think everything should have to be passed in standalone legislation to put everybody on record, and it would give Trump a litany more wins if it was all standalone legislation, because people could see one after the other. That, wow, Trump did that. He did that. He got government away from that. We don't have to pay for that. It's nice to be able to list your accomplishments. Sure. It's just as potent as listing the waste that Doge has found, like he did on the floor of the House. But yeah, I mean, we're already seeing it. Gas prices are down to an average of $3.03. Egg prices are down, like $1.50, $1.80. We're starting to see it already. GDP was up last month. Unemployment was down. It's everything he said would happen if you got government out of the way. So, I mean, what is Schumer trying to protect us from? Success?
Well, yes, I think so. Because it's not going the way they want it to go. Hakeem Jeffries said the other day that Trump is tanking the economy, quote, in real time, unquote. They want that chaos because they have to keep that narrative going that they're somehow fighting for us.
But it's all, but it's all a pack of lies.
Yeah.
It's just all a pack of lies. Well, you'll notice that when Hakeem Jeffries says he's tanking the economy, do you have any examples, Mr. Jeffries? Well, he's just a bad man. He's orange. He's tanking the economy. Show me.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, we've been talking about what was happening with this CR. And by the way, I'm sure you probably saw this as well, but AOC is not happy about that. So, yeah, exactly.
Maybe she can do a little dance on video and make everything okay.
That's right. I guess Chuck Schumer's not choosing the fighters these days. But at any rate,
yeah, that burns an image into your brain, doesn't it?
Right. But of course, what's also going on, and of course, very serious thing happening, is this notion of trying to get a ceasefire in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin has now basically said, in principle, he agrees to this. But I mean, I don't buy anything that he's saying. But he's going to have a lot of demands. Are they going to be able to get from point A to point B, at the very least, to get to a ceasefire?
Well, the biggest stumbling block is going to be NATO membership. And I'm not a Putin fan, but we do have to walk a mile in the guy's shoes before we say absolutely not. In the 1960s, the Russians wanted to put missiles in Cuba, 90 miles off our coast. Mm-hmm. And we established a naval blockade and were willing to threaten nuclear war to make sure that didn't happen. You flip this to 2025, and what he's thinking is, you want to have a NATO member on my border where you can put missile bases? Absolutely not. So, yeah, he's an aggressive bastard that shouldn't have done what he did, and he wants to get some model of the USSR resurrected under his purview. Not good all the way around for freedom, liberty, everything. He's a bad guy. I get it. But you have to look at that issue, and that's the one thing that Zelensky keeps screaming about. He wants to be a member of NATO. Now, you'll notice that when the U.S. addressed this, he said we would address NATO membership. They didn't say, and we'll guarantee talks towards NATO membership. They said, we'll talk about it. Right. That's going to be the stumbling block for Putin, and anybody who can't see that is not seeing geopolitics clearly. So what do? If you're Trump, you use that as the bargaining chip that your opponent wants, and you get all you can for trading that away. Mm-hmm. Now is Trump buying time for the European leaders to get something together to rearm and group up like Herr Starmer said, Javold, about putting together a coalition of the willing to do what NATO would do, so Article 5 is off the table? Would be a bright move. But I'm predicting right now, and I don't usually prognosticate, you know that, Kyle, that
exactly.
If NATO membership is the thing, there's not going to be a peace treaty.
Well, exactly. I don't think, though, that Ukraine necessarily would become a member of NATO. I think there are different reasons for that. But again, I think Putin also is against any peacekeepers at all being sent in, and that would include, obviously, European peacekeepers from these different European countries. So, but of course, all these negotiations always start with a big stone wall and then they have to try to start taking bricks out of that wall to try to get somewhere. But because Putin also, I think, has designs beyond Ukraine, and he's not going to give up any land that he's already taken, it just seems like it really is what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object.
Like Trump said, Zelensky doesn't have the cards. So something of an international nature as far as presence is going to need to happen on Ukrainian soil. And I think you're going to get that with the rare earth deal. Mm-hmm. When you start having foreign assets, you may not have peacekeepers, but along that front there by the Donbass, where all of the rare earth materials are, if all of a sudden you have international interests there, it throws up a roadblock for any kind of military acquisition. Now you're dealing with the international community that will not like it because you're stepping on toes. And yes, I know Putin doesn't care if he steps on toes, but he does care about sanctions, and he does care about selling his oil. So that becomes a disincentive to advance across that line right there that creates that international border without peacekeepers, because the quote-unquote peacekeepers it's being executed by another element of the international community. Not everything has to be about blue helmets. So, that's the disincentive for Putin there. He can get out of this killing machine that is the war that he created, and it's really hurt the Russian people. As far as death is concerned, death and destruction and the maiming of the Russian people. So, it's bright to take the win and wait to see what happens another day, because this is a conflict that's never going to go away. The Russians and the Ukrainians, this idea of ownership, for lack of a better word, it's never going to go away because it's a cultural conflict between the two people.
Exactly.
We could stave off the killing for a while, but somewhere down the line, whether it's 20 years, 25 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, the conflict's going to arise again.
Well, Frank.
So how do you kill this? How do you stop the killing now for a prolonged period of time?
Well, exactly. That's exactly right. Any other president would be lauded for saying they're pursuing peace, at least trying to talk about peace. But everything that we're going to hear, and certainly, and again, these negotiations haven't even taken place. We don't know the whole outcome of this. We know, again, where these parties are lining up here, especially Putin. But if there is any land retained by Putin from what he's already taken in terms of this war, what we're going to hear is this is Neville Chamberlain all over again.
It'll be Neville Chamberlain all over again if Putin just turns around and takes Ukraine.
Right.
Democrats like to convolute history. Neville Chamberlain failed, even though he was celebrated by the left around the world. He was duped, and that's why England had to do what they did during World War II, and it's one of the reasons we got into World War II is because Neville Chamberlain was duped. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the establishment of international presence in Ukraine, even economically, is the same thing as waving the paper, getting off the plane. We have an agreement with Herr Hitler. It's much, much different. That said, the left is never going to give Trump a win. They can't give him a win on the economy here.
Right.
During his first term, what happened? You had home ownership and entrepreneurship rising for every demographic across the board. You had the lower taxes with more prosperity. The economy was doing great. There were no new wars, but the Democrats still called him Hitler. So, looking for adoration from the left, if you're Donald Trump, is like spitting into the wind.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly right. And as I said, any other president who would be looking for peace would be lauded as a visionary. He wants to stop the killing. He cares about people, this kind of thing. But for Trump, it's every thing that they can ever come against him for. And no matter what he would do, they would be against him.
Yeah, they'll just say that he wants to buy a golf course in Ukraine or something, and he's doing it all for selfish reasons.
Right. Frank, again, there are so many things happening that it's hard to keep track of them all. But first of all, also, what do you think these activists tried to take over the Trump Tower lobby in New York? That didn't work out too well. And then you've got these Columbia University students. They're mad because Trump and the Trump administration is trying to deport someone who's not a student, who's not a citizen, and agitating for Hamas. And somehow that's all a big no-no.
Well, let's take the Trump Tower thing first. It's just an angry day out for the left. I'm sure when they get home and sit down on their couches with their signs and everything else, they go, well, wasn't that fun? Wasn't that a good day spent? It achieved nothing. It achieved nothing. We get that you don't like Donald Trump. We didn't like Barack Obama. We just weren't stupid enough to waste the day and go and protest at the University of Chicago because they spawned such an idiot.
I think probably because we had to go to work.
Yeah, so demonstrations at Trump Tower because you're angry about an issue, knock yourself out. Go ahead. It achieves nothing. No one's impressed. It doesn't show intellect. It just shows that you're part of a herd of people with a singular mentality that's stupid enough to waste your day. So go ahead, protest, enjoy yourself. The Columbia thing, what is Columbia University going to do? That's the question, because they risk losing federal grants and federal funding. If they want to die on that financial hill to say that, yeah, we're going to allow our students to do this, okay, well, then I guess for the Board of Regents for Columbia University is stupid enough to give away access to that much funding. Quite honestly, they shouldn't have that funding anyway. I believe they've got $14 billion in endowments. So why the federal government is needing to give grant money to Columbia University when you've got $14 billion in the bank is beyond me. But, you're right. This guy is a former student. He's not a citizen of the United States. And whether he gets deported or not should depend on whether he's broken the law or not. And if the law has been broken, protest away if you want to, little-minded people. But we do live in a country that should be about the rule of law, no matter how much you don't like it. And this is a failure of them understanding how our government works and the lack of civics classes going all through high school and into college. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean you get your way. You don't get your student loans forgiven, and you don't get to dictate immigration policy. Read the Constitution and understand the laws that have been passed to bring that precedent to date that gives that purview to the executive branch. Mm-hmm. If you could sit there and celebrate some jerk opening the border, two jerks opening the border so that tens of millions of people can come into the country and get taxpayer-funded benefits, then you can agonize over the fact that the door is closed now and people who scream death to America every Friday aren't welcome here.
Well, exactly. And, Frank, I know from time to time, I know you love it when I bring out a James Carville quote.
He's just a wellspring of entertainment.
Isn't he, though? I mean, it really is. And again, I use this as an example, to show that they're just scraping the bottom of the barrel. He says he thinks this is the most serious crisis this country has ever faced. Trump. He says, I think the entire idea of the United States is in jeopardy.
Yeah, really? wagging the dog for political purposes and getting and waging war is a little bit more seriously an abuse of power.
Yep.
That someone coming in trying to get rid of the grift that has been happening, mostly spurred by the left in the federal government ever since FDR. How you could call it a crisis when someone uncovers the fact that a gigantic chunk of change from USAID went to non-government organizations that actually payrolled Democratic activists? You've been caught with your hand in the cookie jar, Mr. Carville. And I'd be shocked if you didn't figure out a way to supercharge that while you were in power, so you might be directly culpable. That's why you're running smoke here.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know of anybody, and I do talk to a lot of people, even some on the left. They tend to be annoying, but I do talk to them. You may hate Elon Musk for what he's doing right now, and you may take issue with the way he's going about it, but no one has defended the grift. No one has said, right. Yeah, we should really keep that $9 billion that went to create NGOs. We should just keep that going. And by the way, how is it a non-governmental organization if the government's giving them money?
That's right. Exactly. Well, but you mentioned Elon Musk, and in the news break we heard about, I think it was in Oregon, there was a Tesla dealership getting fired upon. I mean, this is straight up essentially acts of terrorism at that point. Again, to make a political statement, I expect. And unfortunately, Frank, you got people out there who think that's just normal. This is what they do over there. We'll do it over here.
Well, this is, and people on the left, especially the radical left, should take notice. This is what domestic terrorism looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not people getting together to redress government. It's shooting at things. It's throwing Molotov cocktails at things, destroying private property. That's domestic terrorism, especially when you're doing it for political purposes. Someone will get killed eventually, and then there'll be a 5-second outrage in the mainstream media, which is an absolute shame, a moral and ethical shame that can happen. But this is a typical playbook from the left. They win at all cost. It doesn't matter as long as it's in their ideological agenda. They can do whatever they want. Look at Portland during the riots. Look at Chicago during the riots. L.A., New York, all over the place. Didn't matter. Minneapolis. Didn't matter. They burnt down a police station. That wasn't an act of domestic terrorism. That was civil disobedience.
And it was mostly peaceful.
Yeah, evidently with fire. Right. So the double standard here. This is what letting it happen for too long gets you. And like I said, this Tesla thing, someone's going to get killed.
Yeah.
Someone's going to get killed, and that blood has to be on the hands of the radical left who think it's okay to lock and load and shoot.
Yeah. And there will be that 5 minutes of outrage, like you said, and it'll be how terrible it is. And then there's going to be but a lot of people have been made very angry by Elon Musk. It'll be something like that.
You know what? When a child gets angry, and even, okay, let's take it from a touchy-feely PBS point of view. When the child gets angry, we sit down and we have a discussion with the child about how anger needs to be managed, and it's an inappropriate response. But what, somehow you get to be a voting age in this country and all that goes out the window and it's okay to go out and buy ammunition and shoot at someone's place of business?
Right, yeah.
Well, because you're angry. You're angry. We get it. You threw the Molotov cocktail because you were angry. We need to have a safe space for people who are making Molotov cocktails.
Yeah, it's how crazy has everything become like that? Absolutely.
It's completely opportunistic, and it's a load of crap.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
Before I go, I wanted to talk about a news story being buried by the mainstream media complex. Over the weekend of March 8th and 9th, the world watched in stunned horror as reports trickled out of Syria. Christians, Alawites, and other religious minorities were being systemically slaughtered under the iron fist of Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, the radical Islamist now posing as a statesman. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and local sources cited by Newsweek, more than 1,000 people, many of them Christians and Alawites, the sect of the recently ousted Bashar Assad, have been butchered since Thursday, March 6th. Women and children lie among the dead, entire families erased in a wave of sectarian vengeance led by al-Jawlani's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is no isolated tragedy. It's the predictable outcome of an Obama and Biden administration foreign policy so obsessed with toppling Assad that it paved the way for a jihadist nightmare. Let's not mince words. Al-Jawlani is a monster with a resume soaked in blood. He's no rebel or freedom fighter, as the Obama and Biden administration's cheerleaders in the mainstream media once styled him. This is the former emir of al-Nusra Front, al-Qaeda's Syrian franchise, and now the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Sunni Islamist coalition that toppled Assad in December of 2024. His career is a grotesque litany of atrocities, razing Christian villages along the Khabur River, demolishing churches, and orchestrating kidnappings and massacres. In 2015, his forces abducted over 200 Assyrians near Tel Tamir, demanding $100,000 in ransom and executing 3 on camera as a warning to Syria's Christian remnant. Now, as Syria's self-appointed ruler, he's traded his blood-soaked turban for a suit, mouthing empty promises of tolerance, while his jihadist allies butcher minorities across the country. The Obama and Biden administration's fingerprints are all over this catastrophe. The body count is staggering. Since early March, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reports that over 1,000 civilians, predominantly Christians and Alawites, have been killed in revenge attacks. Coastal regions, once safe havens for minorities under Assad, have become killing fields. Yet the usual suspect facilitators of the Obama and Biden administrations remain repugnantly silent. Its once vocal outrage over Assad's crimes replaced by a shameful shrug as al-Jawlani releases hell. This isn't mere negligence, it's complicity. The administrations, alongside a feckless media and a spineless United Nations, has spent years whitewashing al-Jawlani, casting him as a pragmatic reformer to justify their regime change fetish. Now, as Christians die by the hundreds, they're too invested in their narrative to admit the truth. They bet on a terrorist, and Syria's minorities are paying the price. The Obama and Biden administration's role in this disaster cannot be overstated. For years, they funneled support, direct and indirect, to Syria's rebels, a motley crew of factions that included Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the globalist warhawks in Washington, ever eager to topple dictators without a plan for what follows, saw Assad as the ultimate prize. Bashar Assad was no saint. His regime tortured dissidents, gassed civilians, and ruled with a brutal fist. But for Syria's Christians, he was a shield against the Sunni Islamo-fascist tide. Under Assad, Christians, once 10% of Syria's population, could worship openly, celebrate Christmas, and live without fear of jihadist mobs. His Alawite-led government positioned itself as a bulwark against groups like ISIS and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And for all his sins, he delivered stability for minorities. Contrast that with today. Since Assad's fall, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has unleashed a sectarian bloodbath that makes Assad's rule look like a lost Eden for Syria's minorities. Al-Jilani, a wild card with a decades-long hatred of Christians, has turned Syria into a jihadist playground, and the Obama and Biden administration's reckless gamble lit the fuse. They cheered Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as moderates fighting for freedom, ignoring the group's al-Qaeda roots and anti-Christian agenda. When Assad fell in December of 2024, the Biden administration celebrated a victory without asking the critical question, what comes next? The answer is now clear. A genocide for Christians and Alawites, and the Obama and Biden teams are too arrogant to own it. The media's role is equally damning. Outlets like CNN, BBC, and the New York Times have barely whispered about the massacres, preferring to parrot al-Jilani's hollow promises of moderation, framing the carnage as clashes between security forces and Assad loyalists. The United Nations, that perennial apologist for tyrants, has been no better. On March 7th, Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a toothless call to protect civilians, but refused to name Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or al-Jilani as the culprits. Why the cowardice? Because they all bought the Obama and Biden administration's lines. Assad was evil, so his enemies must be good. They hyped Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as liberators, downplaying their jihadist core, and now that the mask is off, they'd rather bury the story than admit their error. The silence reeks of more than bias. It's a tacit endorsement of the far left's failed foreign policy. The media, long hostile to Christians, cheered Assad's demise without a thought for the consequences. Meanwhile, al-Jilani's rebranding has fooled no one but the West's gullible elite. His tolerance, a tactical sham to win approval, not a conversion. The blood of Syria's minorities stains his hands, as well as Obama's and Biden's, and everyone who crafted their pathetic, transformative color revolution foreign policy. The Obama and Biden administration's legacies in Syria, and include in that cadre Hillary Clinton's, Susan Rice's, Samantha Power's, and Victoria Nuland's. They're all grim ones. A dictator toppled, a terrorist empowered, and a minority population left to the slaughter. By backing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and ignoring al-Jilani's true nature, they've turned Syria into a jihadist dystopia. Christians and Alawites are dying, not because of Assad's tyranny, but because of hubris possessed by the Obama and Biden administrations and the far left's obsession with regime change, devoid of foresight or accountability.
You're listening to Underground USA.
The foundation of our great nation lies in our unwavering commitment to freedom, and at its core is the principle of free speech. It's not just a right, but a duty to speak our minds, respectfully debate, and challenge ideas. Today, free speech is under attack by the forces of the deep state and the globalists. We must all do our part to protect free speech, for without it, we'd be lost in a sea of woke conformity and censorship. We have the right. Protect it.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. Brings every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox. And execute your role in safeguarding our republic. Talk politics, religion, and current events with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. When we have these rational, fact-based, non-aggressive conversations, we realize that we have more in common than we have in difference. And that frustrates the balkanizers of the deep state, who need to tribalize us into identity politics divisions so that they can cobble together 51% in any given election by virtue of us being at each other's throats. Let's not fall for that trick anymore. Let's stand together shoulder to shoulder as Americans, and let's kill the deep state, rein in the bureaucracy, and safeguard our republic for future generations. We can do this. We have this moment in time. It's here. You're listening to Underground USA. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism. My name is Frank Salvato.